this is day 4, episode 4 of reading Bendy, The Lost Ones. Today, I decided to add a little twist. Each day, I'm going to choose a new song to play in the intro. If you guys have any suggestions, just let me know. And any requests or comments you have, of course, leave them down in the comments and I'll read through them. So, without further ado, let's get into this book. Alright, well, let's get into it. Chapter 10. Bill. I suppose they assumed I was like my father after all. Even at my age, they assumed I'd want to drink alcohol, and of course, the best kind. Brant's eyes opened so wide that I almost saw the crystal reflected in them. No thank you, I said as the waiter made to pour me a glass. I'll have a Roy Rogers. Brant laughed. Hadn't had one of those since I was a kid. Make that 2. He smiled at the waiter, who looked a little confused, but nodded and went to go get our drinks, leaving the expensive whiskey behind. Brant stared at it and then laughed again. The whole bottle, just like that. If he wanted it. He shook his head. The waiter returned almost immediately for our drinks. Service for the son of Emmett Chambers was always top-notch. Yes, well, I said, raising my glass, it's not generosity if you're not paying for it, so don't think anything of it. I was impressed. I'm not anymore. Wait, what? I was impressed. I'm not anymore. Okay. That makes a lot more sense. Okay, apologies everyone. I was impressed. I'm not anymore, he replied. I laughed. Here's to silver spoons. And not choking on them, I replied. We clinked glasses and sipped our drinks. Brant winced a bit at the sweetness. I knew places like this existed, but Brant leaned back in his chair and looked around. He made no effort to look to the manner born. He wasn't, and I liked that he didn't pretend anyway. After all, it was a beautiful room. Dark wood paneling, walls of shelves, filled to the brim with books, a roaring fire for a windy night like tonight. And it was a particularly quiet night, which I liked. A gentleman's club was fine to have as a retreat, but when packed with men drinking the night away and loudly pontificating, it was my idea of, well, the opposite of heaven. So, I said, leaning back as well, feeling some of the anxiety from the evening finally melt off my shoulders. Should I take the job? Brant looked at me and rolled his eyes. I laughed again. No, but seriously, I said, would it be wrong to? I want to learn, and there's only so much you can teach yourself. Sometimes we don't have the luxury of teachers, replied Brant. I understand. I took another sip. But when you're offered the chance to be taught, just like that, you could be taking away an opportunity from someone who actually needs it. I hadn't thought of that. I really hadn't thought of that. Then again, maybe you have a special gift. Shouldn't waste that, added Brant, thoughtfully swallowing his drink. He was a strange-looking fellow now that I had the time to really appraise him. He was a little short and a little squat, but not in a way that you'd actually describe him like that. His hair was already receding, but he was young. He had to be about my age. Maybe it wasn't that. Maybe it was just so thin and light. I wasn't sure what the ladies would make of him, but he had a twinkle in his eye that I bet they enjoyed. I couldn't figure him out, but I knew there was something appealing about him, and I appreciated his directness. Well, now, I have no idea what to do, I replied, and then my stomach sank. Oh, no. I slid down into my chair. Are you hiding? Asked Brant, turning around in his chair. Darn tootin' I was hiding. Wait, is that your father? Darn tootin' it was my father. Over the top of Brant's head, there by the entrance, having their coats checked by our overly friendly coat check girl Laura, was my father and the men from New York. The ladies looked to have retired for the night, a pity because now things would turn to late-night festivities much more early. much more easily. Maybe even all night. Now, is that my son I see? I tried to sink lower into my chair. My father treated me like an old friend and not like a grave disappointment. Nothing good came from it. Obviously, I couldn't actually hide from these men. Not in the real world, or in my carefully curated, father-oriented future. They were quickly upon us, dragging heavy chairs painfully noisily across the hardwood floor. "What have we got here?" asked Mr. Bowman, picking up the decanter, with his very large hand able to wrap around almost entirely. "Macallan 18, I replied with a tight-lipped smile. "It'll do." He snapped for a waiter, and before he made it to our table, called out glasses. Father sat down next to me and gave me a look. "Where'd you disappear off to?" "Someone had to get the lights back on," I replied. He shook his head. "I think they had it under control." "Actually, sir, thanks to your son, the lights came on a good deal sooner than they would have. We had to wait for a contract to arrive," said Brent. His tone was polite, far more deferential than when he spoke to me. He knew how to behave around certain people. He knew I was certain people. What made him choose what kind of tone to make? I glanced at my father and was embarrassed to discover him eyeing Brant with the same expression I found myself sporting. I relaxed my face into a more open one. "Who's this?" Father asked. "It's my friend Brant. You've met him before, Father," I said. Father looked carefully at him, then shrugged. "He does seem familiar." I didn't think I needed to add that Brant was the one who'd ordered to take the horse up the diving platform. Let him assume he was one of us for now. "So you fellows from New York?" asked Brant. "You can't tell," I replied, trying to shift the tone. "New York?" one of the smaller men called out, raising his glass. The others did the same, and they drank, downing their McLennans in one gulp. "Here on business?" asked Brant. "What are you, a cop?" asked Mr. Russo with a laugh. "Why would a cop care if you're here on business?" followed up Brant. "It's all the questions, not what you're asking," replied my father, with an edge in his voice. It wasn't that he didn't like questions, he just preferred to be the one asking them. Brant definitely heard it all and held up a hand in apology. "I'm so sorry. I just got curious." "Be careful about that," replied my father. "Well, my uncle always said curiosity is an excellent way to expand your mind," Brant said with a grin. "Funny, mine said it was a good way to get yourself killed." Father finished his drink and started to pour himself another. "Different strokes for different folks, I suppose." "Very true," replied Brant in his pleasant way. "Another?" I asked, motioning to the waiter. Brant nodded with a smile. We exchanged a look, one that suggested we were in on this together, dealing with the excess of wealth with humor and grace, and not without a great deal of appreciation for the absurdity of it all. As the waiter replaced his glass, I did have to wonder, though, if he wasn't a cop, what was he? Thomas Connor. I was working with idiots. How hard was it to move something down a flight of stairs, especially if it was your job to move things? "Hire movies," they said. "It'll save time," they said. I pushed the scrawny fellow holding the left side of the crate out of the way and grabbed it myself. "Come on," I said. Yes, it was heavy, but sometimes something heavy felt good. Feeling the strain in your muscles, work it took, you felt alive. But also, sometimes the job just needed to be done. Quit moaning about it. Moaning. It hadn't made a peep the whole journey. I wasn't even sure it was still with us. I didn't understand what was happening and why it happened yet. I was pretty sure that it was with us, though. That it would move with the machine. It had some kind of connection to it. They all did. We made it down the first flight of stairs. I pushed the hidden button so we could head down the rest. Scott had found this place, this old factory from probation days. There were lots of places like this in the city, but this one was special. This one had more than what it was at first glance. Glad I had Scott as my right-hand man. Glad he was still around. So many of the gentlemen had left Atlantic City by now, moved to other gent locations in larger cities with more things that broke down and more things to fix. But Atlantic City was our real home. The place where inventions were made, where the sky filled with light at night, where Ferris wheels survived harsh, icy winds from the ocean. Here we made things special, the magical things. Here we made the machine, and here we would fix it. Chapter 11. Constance. The next day was bright and cheerful, almost too bright and cheerful. Possibly it had less to do with the sun sparkling on the water and more to do with Molly's general level of exhausting excitement. Tell us everything! She would squeeze my hand so tight I thought she might pull it right off. Suddenly she released it so quickly, fumbled for her handkerchief in her pocket, and sneezed daintily. She was determined not to have a cold, even though the cold was not as determined not to have her. Lily was walking quickly up ahead of us, almost purposefully showing she didn't care, though I didn't know why. We both knew she did, as I came away last night with a Bendy, and she was definitely not sitting well with her, though I'd hardly call the mysterious Andrew my Bendy. There isn't much to tell. We danced, and there was a blackout, so we went outside, I replied. He wants to take me for an early supper tonight before work, as I said. I realized we were fast approaching the exact same spot he and I had sat on the ground. Lily had wanted some taffy, and though there were many shops that sold it, James was by far the best. That I hadn't made the connection until now that we showed that that I hadn't made the connection until now just showed me how off I was feeling. Yesterday had been a whirlwind, and today I felt utterly spent, exhausted. I looked out to the ocean. It was calmer today. It had made me feel better. I knew weather patterns were independent of what emotions were attributed to them, but a calm sea was a calm bomb. It was a kind of bomb. Isn't that the young man from last night? Asked Lily up ahead. She pointed a gloved finger, and I looked, feeling my face get warm and my heart suddenly beating fast. Where? Asked Molly with excitement. Walking towards us wasn't Andrew, but the rich kid. You know him? I asked, but Lily was far too ahead to hear me, or she chose to go back to ignoring me. So I just watched as we moved towards each other. He was in a long, tan wool coat, fedora, and gray scarf. He was tall and strong-looking. Every picture his father. The same chestnut-colored hair, too. I recalled from last night, though now hidden under his hat, a handsome fellow in general, though he didn't seem to understand the fact that about himself, or at least didn't want to seem to understand it. He looked every bit the role of casual wealth. You saw it in Atlantic City, turning around corners, walking through doors held open, pointing out to the sea and talking about photographs, riding by in rickshaws. There was the trying too hard wealth as well. Those men who practically carried dollar bills in their fists walking down the street, women with feathers and diamonds and furs of every possible color. As a child, I'd wondered what magical beast had been skinned to produce a purple muff or a shockingly pink hat. But that was not the Chamberesses. They weren't old money. They behaved like they were. I didn't know where the money came from, in fact. Maybe it was old. I just had been told otherwise. What did I know of the politics in Atlantic City? I just kept my head down and focused on my own little world when it came to all that. Lily stopped to speak with the rich kid, so we stopped a moment after, finally joining her at her side and not being shunned completely. She had turned on the charm, and I walked in my usual awe. Lily was a good kid deep down, but she was a baby of the family, and had spent her whole 16 years of life working hard to be noticed, at the expense of anyone and everyone. It was frustrating sometimes, but in her moments, she radiated pure energy. When her smile could fill a whole city block, she was so fun to watch. When the two of them were chatting about, I hadn't any idea. I was lost in my admiration of my little sis, when suddenly all eyes were on me. Constance, come here, said Lily in her lilting, friendly voice. I glanced at Molly, who gave me a knowing smile, and I laughed. Oh, Lily, now we were best friends, I see. But I did what I was told and joined them. Constance, right? Asked the rich kid. Yes. I was feeling unbelievably shy in the moment. I remembered staring at him the night before. Why had I done that? Oh, Constance. It's so wonderful to run into you. Are you available at the moment? He asked. Oh, how I hated questions like these. If I said I was, then no matter what the reason for his questions, I was stuck. I couldn't say no to something with him knowing I had the time. What if his maid was sick, or he needed a housekeeper for the day, or something else of that nature? Some druggery that now I could not refuse. I could feel my sister staring at me. Yes, I replied softly. Excellent. Our filmmakers have already edited together the footage from yesterday, and I thought you would enjoy seeing it. We are screening it for a few resters and such. You're smiling so brightly. Do you mean right now? I asked. Yes, since you're available after all. After all. We're a relatively modern family, and going somewhere with a young man by myself was not necessarily seen as a bad thing. There would also be investors, evidently. But for some reason I wish very much we were the kind of family that insisted upon chaperones. Go, Constance, it sounds like fun. If I wasn't under the weather, I'd join you, replied Molly. Ah, you're the diving sister. Yes, said Molly with a smile. The original. I'm so glad to have run into you, said the rich kid. You're all welcome, of course. No, said Lily in her direct way. I have plans. I looked at her, wishing I had the ability to just say no to things like she did, to do just what I wanted with no worries about hurting the feelings of others. Well then, it's just you and me, he said, turning to me. He extended his arm, and I placed my hand in the crook of his elbow. I felt deeply uncomfortable, but I smiled. We walked away from my sisters, and I felt my face burning as we passed the spot from last night again. Where are we going? I asked as calmly as I could. To my father's hotel. The Plaza, he replied. Oh, I said. That didn't make me feel any better. We have a projection screen set up in one of the smaller hall rooms, he added quickly. That was kind of him to clarify, and it did help a bit. We walked then in silence until we arrived at the hotel. Then he escorted me through the cadaverous lobby, with its dark wooden front desk stretching the width of the room. Rich green sofas on which patrons casually reclined, and gold accents on the walls and ceilings that glinted in the chandelier. This is beautiful, I said. You've never been inside? He asked, sounding quite shocked. I've never thought to come inside without a reason. It feels wrong. Well, from now on, no, you are always welcome, he said. Tell them I sent you if they say anything. I glanced at him as he led us down the hallway with the fine brocade wallpaper. And who should I say you are? I asked. It was such an awkward question. I realized I was speaking with weird formality, like he was a prince or something. My insides burned. The rich kid stopped in his tracks and looked at me. I'm Bill Chambers. From the other day. I was there when you dove. Oh, I said quickly. I know who you are. I just didn't know the particulars, like your first name. Bill laughed, then shook his head. I'm so sorry. How rude of me. It's okay. I laughed a little too. Laughing set people at ease. I didn't want him to feel bad. Am I late? Suddenly we were joined by a young man with thin hair, panting like he'd just finished a race. Brant, old chum, glad you could make it. I know you, I said, staring at Brant intently. Oh, yes, you do, he replied. He strained his posture and even gave a little bow at his neck. I brought you your horse yesterday. Of course, I said. I didn't know why I felt so relieved to see him. Maybe it was as simple as seeing someone else who wasn't rich, or just another familiar face. But I smiled sincerely for the first time. Come on, you two. The screening starts soon, said Bill, pulling at my arm that was still firmly attached to his. What could we do? We obeyed. Chapter 12. Brant. I sat next to the horse girl in the back of the room. Chairs had been set up in 4 rows, and there were plenty of available seating, but I didn't want to sit up front. I wasn't here for the movie. I was here for the men, standing around the trolley bar, laughing loudly and clinking into their glasses. Who are they? Asked Constance, leaning over, and I felt immediately intimidated. Oh, sure, I'd been around pretty girls plenty. There were a lot in my neighborhood. She actually reminded me of this girl, Francine. Everyone said she was my sweetheart when I was 8 years old. As if either of us cared about that kind of stuff. We just liked pretending we were detectives solving neighborhood mysteries. But if I had to put her in a category of celebrity, yesterday, The category of celebrity yesterday. And now we were just sitting together like this, like normal people. I definitely needed to get over this feeling if I was going to interview all types. They're from New York, doing business with Bill's dad. Are they the ones who wanted a tourist film then? She asked. Is that what this is? I asked. Of course. The pieces were all coming together. That's why Mr. Clark had been invited to watch. That's why we printed that strange piece on changes in tourism post-World War II. This morning, tourism. Huh. What kind of investments were needed to boost a thing like that? You know, this might be wrong of me to say, she said, leaning even closer. I could feel her breath on my cheek, but they look awfully like the sort of men you hear about back in the probation days. The sort of people my father ended up delivering things to at very strange hours when he was a clerk around our age. I definitely think you're onto something, I replied. Hey, I wasn't saying it. She was. She smiled. Fun. I smiled too. Of course, it wasn't really fun. It was illegal, and probably pretty dangerous. We were on the fringes of something a lot darker than this cute moment sitting in the back row. Still, for the two of us, as outsiders, we could help but see it as exciting or fun. After all, I saw this as a story that could get me my byline. She saw it as an intrigue. How did Bill see it? It was his actual life. Probably quite differently, probably as dangerous as it actually was. Perspective changes everything. Thank you all for coming. Bill's father stood in front of the makeshift screen with a big grin on his face, his thumbs each jammed in a jacket pocket, his fingers drumming at his torso. This is the first attempt, but we wanted all your feedback. After all, Atlantic City deserves the best representation because it's the best city in America. Constance and I clapped at that, but we were two of only a few who did. The guest list consisted mostly of New Yorkers. You didn't tell New Yorkers that anywhere was the best city in America if it wasn't New York. Let's roll the film, shall we? Said Bill's father, seeming quite unfazed. But I had a feeling he was seething inside. This was a man who liked to be liked. The man who sat in the front row next to his son, and the lights were dimmed. The projector was turned on, and for a moment we were just staring at a bright square of light. Then I heard the reel spinning from behind me, and the picture started. We began on an aerial shot of the boardwalk. Of course, it was definitely the most pristine part of the city. Had they hired a plane for it? I was very impressive to see the city from the ocean like that. The steel pier stuck out in the bright waves and then came butting up onto the boardwalk. I'd always been amazed by it as a kid. How did those wooden posts go into the sea supporting a large building that worked its way right to the tip, getting progressively smaller as it did until it opened into fresh air? You could feel like you're alone, lost at sea. If you stood at the tip and didn't turn around, didn't feel like there was a whole city behind you. The camera flew over the beach with tiny people and tiny open umbrellas, then up onto the narrow boardwalk that ran the length of the sand. The small shops that lined it had their awnings unfurled and the glass-arched windows polished with sheen. A large castle-like brick hotels rose from behind them, looking as impressive as ever. Clearly, everyone had been prepared for the shoot and was showing themselves off to great effort. Next, the film was cut to a close-up of tourists walking on the boardwalk. They walked in their summer finest, smiling and laughing and pointing at windows. Oh, look, they seemed to say James Saltwater Taffy. Cute hat. Nice shoes. How delightful. It made me want to gag. It was weird watching it all without any voiceovers yet. Just shots of different places and people. Nothing tying them together except for how welcoming it looked. They had done a decent job at that. They wouldn't be shooting in my neighborhood. That was for certain. They wouldn't be shooting in the north side either. Not any of the dirty, salt-ravaged buildings on the fringe of these shots. No reality would seep into the edges of this sparkling make-believe world. And then I was looking at the diving platform. It took me by surprise, but there was Constance standing up on top, waving, and there I was. Though you couldn't tell it was me, with Trix, the horse. Had this just been yesterday? Watching it all on film made me feel like it never happened at all, or had been years ago. It's you on a horse, I said, leaning over to Constance. It is, she replied, sounding a little bit embarrassed. Here comes the dive. a look at her, her profile staring straight ahead. She was lit by the screen, but otherwise a dark silhouette. What did a girl like that? What did a girl like that think about? She would suddenly look right at me. Do you smell smoke? I sniffed the air and she was right. I turned in my seat and saw that there was smoke coming from the back of the projector. The operating system was quickly panicking, trying to fix whatever was wrong, and doing a pretty terrible job at it. Turn the darn thing off, I said, loudly enough that the whole room could hear. Harry turns around. What's going on? asked Mr. Chambers. Rising in his seat, Bill was fast to his feet as well. Sorry, sir, it's the projector. Just hold on, we got this, replied the operator. Oh boy, this wasn't going to go over well. Mr. Chambers stormed back towards us and stared down the projectionist. If looks could kill, his would do the trick. If only looks could fix projectors. He finally examined the object itself, saw the smoke, and shook his head with a scowl. This is disaster, I heard him hiss. Fix it. I'm trying, said the projectionist, but with the panic in his voice, either he didn't know or was too intimidated to think clearly. He turned to his colleague and quickly said, Get the man from Gent in here. His colleague flew out of the room just as Bill approached. Can I help? He asked. Sit down, son, said his father, his tone ice cold. I think I could fix it, father, replied Bill, sounding polite and much younger in a way that I'd ever heard him sound. I watched closely as Bill examined the projector and opened it up. I didn't know what he was doing, but I trusted he'd be able to fix the thing. No sooner than he stood upright with a small smile on his face than the fellow Scot came walking quickly into the room. This would be fun, I thought, leaning back in my seat. I fixed it, said Bill, sounding incredibly proud of himself. It was strange that someone so rich should care so much about such things. Scott looked over the projector and turned it on. It whirled back to life, lighting the men standing in their seats, turning their heads into the screen with dancing girls. Felt right. These men certainly seem to always have girls on their mind. Good work, said Scott. Thank you. Remember what I said last night? Who are you? Get out of here, said Bill's father with a wave of his hand. Scott rolled his eyes at Bill and the fellow smiled. A shared secret. I need to get going, said Constance then. Bill heard that and came over. Weren't you just magnificent? He asked. It's interesting seeing myself on screen, that's for sure. She replied with a little laugh. You were quite impressive fixing that machine. Bill beamed. He was coming on a bit too strong, but then again, when you have that much money, it doesn't matter how you come across. You generally get a positive reception. Thank you again, she said. Brant, it was nice to meet you officially. I took her offered gloved hand and held it for a moment. It felt nice. She gently pulled it away and then slipped out of the row of the seats through the door. She vanished so quickly, so effortlessly, it was a neat trick. I thought then, maybe girls like that need to know how to disappear. Attention isn't always a good thing. I didn't understand it myself. I was tired of being invisible. I was desperate to be noticed, to be taken seriously. But everyone's different. Look at Mr. Fix-It here. Proud as punch that he'd fixed the projector like he'd saved the world. We all want different things, and that's okay. Just as long as I get what I want too. Ready to continue, announced Mr. Chambers. I sure as heck was. Yes. Chapter 13. Constance. I had to hurry home to get ready for my date. It was a strange thing for me to think about, and I didn't entirely hate it. I flew upstairs past my sisters, helping Mother peel apples for a pie, and into my room. I quickly tore off my clothes and stood there in my slip, suddenly completely still, staring at the half-dozen dresses I owned. How I wished I had a proper job as a scientist or something, so that I could afford to buy things that were not necessities, like pretty dresses from lovely shops. I sat on my bed staring at my open closet. Then I turned to look at my little chemistry set. I'd barely used it. I had only done the usual experiments, the easy ones they teach children, like making crystals with bicarbonate soda and mixing copper with nitric acid. How I wish my parents had insisted at 16 we had to leave school to start earning an income. There were so many more things left to learn. But my parents had both dropped out when they were teenagers to help support their families, and they didn't see why we shouldn't do so as well. We need the money more than a high-class education, as they called it. And it wasn't as if my parents had stopped learning. They loved reading, in their Shakespeare and his story. So why not leave school to make money and study on your own? But there was so much you could learn without a good teacher, I found, and I enjoyed school a lot. I started to resent this date now. I hardly had any free time, and it didn't seem fair somehow. Yesterday had already been full doing things for other people. Now today, Bill, the rich kid, needed my time this morning, and a date coming up with Andrew soon. All these boys seem to need my time. Yesterday was Mr. Chambers himself, though he was hardly a boy, and there was a whole other sort of thing. That wasn't a flavor as much as it was an order and a rescue mission. Molly's reputation certainly would have suffered if I hadn't filled in, no matter how terrified I was at the prospect. It was nice doing things for others. I just wish I had some time to myself once in a while. Oh, that felt selfish to think. Was it? Wasn't it? Was it? I felt almost angry. But no, that was silly. I quickly buried the feeling. This was all silly. The screening had been interesting and the dates were delightful. If it wasn't as if I had never been on one before. They just weren't as frequent as my sisters. But yes, as I recalled, they were quite lovely. Fun conversation, some lovely food, butterflies in the stomach. Then why did my butterflies feel more like dread? I stood up in a rush, feeling a little flushed and upset, though. I couldn't understand why. I grabbed my rose dress and hastily put it on. It would have to do, and I had nice lipstick to match. Once made up, I fixed my hair and was feeling better until Molly knocked on the door. "Andrew is waiting for you," she said with a giggle. I double-checked my appearance in the mirror and then grabbed my gray wool jacket and hat. "You look so cute," said Molly as I passed her in the kitchen. "Don't be late for the show," ordered Lily, not looking up. I rolled my eyes at Molly and Mother smacked her with the dish towel. "Have fun, dear." I wanted to. I really did. I wasn't sure I knew how. I ran downstairs and gave Mrs. Wilson a little wave and a smile as she peeked at me from behind her chain on the door. She always needs to know everything. I stepped outside and there was Andrew waiting for me on the sidewalk with a lovely bouquet of pink roses. "They're beautiful," I said, stunned. "So are you," he said. I didn't look at him and instead purposely examined the flowers. The compliment was silly and sounded like something he'd said before. Not in a bad way, it just didn't feel like a compliment aimed specifically at me. But that was my ego, I suppose. "Shall we go?" I asked. He nodded and offered his arm. I was reminded of Bill's earlier. These boys. I took it. We went for a nice long stroll and ended up at Regano's Italian restaurant. I'd never been and was quite excited about it as I took off my coat and he pulled out a chair for me. I sat down and took off my gloves as he sat opposite of me. We were right by the window and the glass gave off a bit of a cold, but it was nice to be able to watch people go by. We were otherwise alone. The restaurant had only just opened. "It's very nice of you to accommodate my schedule," I said. "Of course. Classes at university, schedules are all over the place. Why, I had dinner with a chum the other day at midnight because it was the only time he and I could see each other," he said with a laugh. I laughed too. Generally, midnight was not a big deal in Atlantic City. I decided not to tell you I'd been staying out and having meals that late since I was 15. "Where do you go to school?" I asked. I was instantly envious. "I attend Rutgers. I plan on going to law someday," he said. "Oh, how interesting. If I went to university, I would study science." I said. I knew I shouldn't have said that, but I had been thinking about such things and it spilled out. Why on earth would he care about what I would have done if I had the chance? Such a silly hypothetical. There I went again, saying the wrong thing at the wrong time. Focus, Constance. Focus. "Science. Neat," said Andrew, taking a sip of water. I always liked science. I found law very interesting. I liked the complexities and questions of morality. I nodded. I was particularly grateful he sidestepped my brazenness, and continued on his own track as I should have done with the conversation. I could do this. I could be normal. "Lawyers do seem to have interesting lives," I said, never having met a lawyer before. "Oh, they really do. One of my professors invited me for dinner the other day, and he said the funniest thing." Andrew paused, remembering it. I smiled as he thought. The waiter arrived and hovered nearby. We all waited in anticipation. I can't quite remember, he said finally. I laughed nonetheless, to I'm at ease. I was getting better at this. Maybe it was because this was our second encounter. Maybe it was the oddness of the morning. May I take your orders? Asked the waiter. I opened the menu. I haven't even... We each have a plate of lasagna. I'll have the murat, and the lady will have sparkling water, said Andrew with a smile. Very good, sir, replied the waiter. Thank you, I said, handing in my menu with a smile. I wasn't against lasagna as an idea, but I'd rather excited to go through the menu, to imagine what everything might look like and taste like. I didn't even have a chance to open it. Oh well, that was dating. I'm just going to say this now before I continue. If you ever go on a date with a guy and he doesn't let you speak on what you want to eat, that just isn't right. But let's get back into this. Chapter 14. Brand. After the screening, I was feeling inspired. I was fast at work at the spare typewriter at the office. I could tell Mr. Clark was watching me, not all the time, but he would pop his head out of his office and squint at me. He didn't want me writing this story. Not even Mr. Chambers was an investor in the paper himself. Oh wait, I misread that. I apologize. Not when Mr. Chambers was an investor in the paper itself. But this was too good. Those men from New York, I didn't recognize any of them yet, but there were a good chance if I did some cross-referencing in the files, if they weren't mob-affiliated, I'd eat my own hat. And I only had one hat, so that meant something. I left the afternoon practically skipping down the street, like my little sister. I had the idea just to head back towards the club. Maybe I'd run into Bill again, or his father, or those men. And I realized, no, the Atlantic Plaza Hotel. It was by far the grandest hotel Mr. Chambers owned, and there was no way he wasn't putting up his guests in one of the prime Ocean View suites. I'd stake out the lobby. I turned on my heel and made my way towards the waterfront. As always, the air got colder and windier as I got closer to the water. Some days it made you feel frigid, but today it felt so invigorating. I was ready to take on the world. I arrived at the plaza and awkwardly smiled at the door. I saw the doorman as I passed through in a giant marble foyer. Sure, it had been fine when Bill had been there with me this morning, but on my own I suddenly felt very out of place. I had to admit I didn't tend to visit these buildings much. Even though I was supposed to be free to do so, they intimidated me. Sure, but also the ostentatious wealth. Ostentatious wealth. The expense of having marble imported in giant cavernous space filled with nothing, while others lived paycheck to paycheck and were barely able to put food on their tables, made me uncomfortably twitchy. Can I help you, sir? Asked the man in a tailored jacket with AP embroidered on the lapel. Right. That was the other reason. When you looked and dressed like me, you weren't going to be allowed to loiter for too long. Just waiting to pick up a package, I replied. I'll just stay back here. Shall I call up to the room, sir? Asked the man, clearly not believing me. No, they said not to disturb them. The man looked at me with one eyebrow raised. I can wait outside, I said, and backed out slowly. I passed once more through the door held by the doorman, and he gave me a sympathetic shrug. I crossed the street and stared out into the ocean. The sky was blue and bright. The sun was just beginning its descent and gave everything a warm glow. The water looked almost welcoming. You could be deceived. It was as warm as the tropics if it wasn't for the cold wind blowing. I turned and leaned against the railing of the boardwalk, watching the entrance at the hotel. It was cold, but it was just as good. Besides, my excitement was helping keeping me warm outside. Brant? Someone was calling up to me from the beach below. I looked down over the railing and saw Bill waving up at me. That was unexpected and a very welcome sight. Bill! I called out, waving back. What are you doing there, pal? Collecting shells. Come down and join me, he said. Collecting shells? That didn't seem like a hobby of a rich kid. But then again, what did I know? Not the hobbies of rich kids. Sure. I made my way to the stairs and joined him on the beach. The sand slipped under my shoes, and I struggled to make my way over to him. Shells? I asked once I finally made it. Bill nodded and held up his hand. He had half a dozen or so shells, mostly small, but quite detailed and unbroken. finding good unbroken shells did take some good work. Funny seeing you here, he said. I needed some air before I headed home. He nodded. I wondered now if he trusted me. I thought we had a good thing going, but it hadn't occurred to me that he might not entirely be falling for my friend act. I turned and pointed over towards a smaller hotel a few buildings down from the plaza. That's your dad's also, right? He nodded again. That one, and that one, and that one. He pointed them out as they disappeared into the distance along the boardwalk. What's that like? What's what like? Having a dad who owns a city. I pulled my coat tight around me and started walking a little in place. Honestly? He asked. Why would you not be completely honest with a stranger you just met yesterday? I asked back with a grin. He finally smiled. I try not to think about it. I just want to live my own life. I don't want to own all this. It's too much work and too much... He paused. I waited for him. Don't push. Sometimes it's dangerous. Dangerous? He gave me a look. You know what I mean. Did I? Was he confirming what I was thinking about those men last night? Those men from New York, I said. But he didn't say anything. He just looked back towards the sea. I get wanting to do your own thing, have your own dreams. Why do older folk try to push things on us? They make up their minds about everything, and now that they're old, they want us, as young people, to take on their dreams. But no. Young people, they were rebels. I said, this thinking about my aunt and uncle, thinking about how they took me in, thinking about how they sacrificed for that, felt a little guilty. Exactly, said Bill. Exactly. I felt a little bad, I said. You do? Why? All this talking about dreams and such, and I told you not to pursue yours. Show some empathy. Remember the details. Make them feel special. Apologies, everyone. Bill smiled. Oh, that's just silliness. What purpose could it serve? Besides, you're right. I don't want to take employment from someone else. Or maybe they have no plans to hire anyone. But you were the exception, you know, I said. An idea just occurring to me. You could offer to work for free. A small business can always use the help. It would be more like, I don't know, a charity act? Charity act, he said. He seemed to think about it for a moment, but then dismissed it. Well, it's neither here nor there. I should be heading inside. There's a diner I'm obligated to go into. With these same men? I asked. Bill nodded, looking a little distracted. If you'd like company, he looked at me confused. I'm just saying that I have no plans. Brant, Bill said, frowning slightly. Desperation isn't a good look. Oh, I didn't mean to push. Too far, Brant. Too far. I know, I'm sorry. I'm just tired of people wanting things from me. I know you aren't like that. I understand, I said. I felt like I just tried to capture a stray dog by grabbing it by its scruff. Next time, I told myself. Next time. Well, have a nice dinner. Thank you, said Bill. He looked at his hand for a moment, then turned and threw the shells out into the water. He rubbed his hands together and gave me one last nod. He made this way along the beach, back to the stairs. I sat down in the cold sand and pulled my jacket collar up. This always happened. I always went just a little too far. Folks gave me an inch and I took a mile. As the saying went, my uncle said it was a good quality, especially as a reporter. But I guess sometimes it's not, especially with the skittish marks like Bill. Next time, I'll do better. Next time, I'll get the scoop. Alright, everyone. That is to Chapter 15, Bill. I hope you guys enjoyed my reading tonight. And I will say, I do enjoy this book. We still have a long way to go, people. I think... Let me actually see before we get done with this tonight. Let's see how many chapters there is. Because I don't actually know. So, still nothing. Jesus. Oh my. There is 41 chapters. This book is 41 chapters, and we are on chapter 15. Everyone, thank you for staying. Thank you for listening. And I hope you all have a great night. And if you have anything you want to say, just let me know down in the comments. Hope you guys have a great day, great night, anything. I'm going to put on my fedora now. Bum, bum, ba-da, bum, bow, bow.